Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Business Growth Show, where we talk about all components of business and how to utilize them for exponential growth. My name is Athin Cassiotis. I'm a serial entrepreneur, international speaker, results strategist, business coach, mentor, and consultant. Today, I have an awesome guest. He is a massively successful investor and strategist specializing in helping entrepreneurs leverage their receivables business to create huge personal wealth. A serial entrepreneur, business and wealth coach, event producer, and co-author of Purpose Code. In his 25-year career, he's established 20 plus entities producing 300 million in revenue. His latest venture is traveling the world to teach asset wealth management. Welcome, Eric Lochtefeld, and thank you for being on my show.
Well, thank you so much for having me on the Business Growth Show. I've heard so much about this fantastic podcast. And in the background for you right now is one of my favorite places in the world, which is Sydney, Australia. So I'm talking to you from my Bliss Island resort in Hawaii. So we're both in wonderful places. So I'm excited for this time together.
Yeah, awesome. I love that. It's going to be such an amazing show today. And I love that one of your favorite places in the world is Sydney, and it is an amazing place. And I've always wanted to go to Hawaii. So I might have to visit Bliss Island very soon once we're allowed to get out of this country in these.
You're invited.
Much appreciated, mate. I really look forward to it. So let's start. You're a very successful entrepreneur, right? So just for those people who don't know who you are, just please introduce yourself by telling us about you and your journey.
Yeah, I'll skip over the first 20 years because it's really clear what I was and what I did. I was an event producer, and I produced hundreds of concerts all over the world. I did summer music festivals and various different events, and I did quite well in that space. Right off the bat, I helped create the Vans Warped Tour, which I believe we took to Australia in year 3 or 4 at some point. That's the longest running music festival in American history, and very, very proud of that path. But ultimately, around 40 years old, I was starting to build what would become a global company. 30 years old. I was starting to build what would become a global company. And along the way, the company was growing so fast that I needed to access capital in order to handle the needs of the growing business, right? We tell ourselves, if we just get more revenue, I'll have no money problems. Well, my growth from 5 to 12 million as a business, all it did was give me money problems, right? And if I had thought years before, if I got to 10 million, I'll have no problems in the world. So all of a sudden I realized that I needed lines of credit to support the business and its seasonality, and they needed to exponentially grow every year. And the banks kept saying the same thing to me. You're a receivables-based business. You have no assets. And finally, after a couple of years, it sunk in. And I was so sick and tired of banks telling me that. Because, of course, what I wanted to do and what every founder and CEO does, but my business grew 50% for 4 straight years. We just want to talk about our sales, right? Banks don't care about that. Hey, that's great. Good little proverbial pat on the back, but you have no assets. So you're only as good as your next sale. So I want that to sink in. Are you running a business that's only as good as the next sale? Well, what happens if some world event happens? Like a pandemic or COVID or a recession, right? And all of a sudden that next sale is not guaranteed. What do you actually have? What is the wealth in the business? What is your personal wealth tied to, right? So I think that's the subject we're going to be getting into today.
Yeah, I love that. That's so amazing. And, how to do all those events and then, understanding, okay, well, this is the gap and everything with assets. So let's start from the start a little bit more on this journey of yours. So when did you first realize that you would be far wealthier through the asset wealth management strategy rather than other strategies? And then, what happened from there?
Sure. I was building up a global summer internship business. And in order to run these summer internship programs, I was actually renting dorm rooms at various universities around the world, from Stanford University to NYU. And I even brought my program to Sydney, Australia. And so ultimately, I was the world's worst renter. I was spending over $5.5 million a year to rent dorm rooms for my 1,000+ interns every summer. And in about year 7, I got tired of the banks telling me that, it was a growing business. It was going global. It was doing awesome, but I needed so much cash flow to support the needs of this business. And ultimately they kept telling me I don't own anything. And it started to sink in, and I started to play with the spreadsheet. And I said to myself, if I were to buy a dorm room in Sydney, Australia, or New York City, or LA, what would the math be on that based on what I'm paying to rent these individual dorm rooms, right? At the time, I was paying NYU for 1,000 dorm rooms at $30 a day per person. So you start to do the math on that. And every scenario I ran, no matter where the city in the world, even if it was in a high rent area, I could own whatever building I bought within 7 years. Own. So here I am running a $10 million summer internship program, and I could have owned real estate in Hong Kong, Manhattan, LA, Silicon Valley, and it was penciling out for every last one. Now, I couldn't go back in time and start the business 7 years earlier, but I did start to pay attention to that. And by year 10, I actually made an asset acquisition so that the banks would shut up. I actually bought a city block in a town called Redwood City, California, in the middle of Silicon Valley. And it was an up and coming city. And it had a theater in it, and it had a lot of office space, which I moved my company into. And now banks no longer said, where are your assets? Because I said, oh, I've got this $6 million property I acquired. Okay. Well, then what they did is, in order to get the loan, I did a loan through the Small Business Administration in America. And what they did was something interesting. They made me form two companies, one that would own the asset and a second company that would operate the asset. Okay, I want you to hear that really clearly. And so I was both the landlord and I became a tenant, in essence being the operator of that space. And I thought that was a weird structure until I got started. The bank just wanted to have collateral. They wanted to know where their money was going to come from. So they only do deals with operating companies, right? They already know that they have the asset as collateral. So this operating company had to sign a lease with the landlord company. I thought that was weird. I go, I'm signing a lease with myself, whatever. But every month I started to pay that lease, and the money would transfer over from my operating company, which was a concert promotions company. It would go into the kitty of my landlord company. And I noticed on the balance sheet, I had this $5 million debt item to this bank, and they would get their cut, the interest, but the principal would also go down every month. And I had about a $33,000 rent payment. Well, about half of that was attributed to my principal. And I started to realize it was such a hassle at the beginning to be able to make that rent payment. But over time, I'm like, the bank's not taking that for themselves. They're just taking their interest. That other half, that's my money. I just got $15,000 richer. Every month I made a rent payment. And I started to realize no matter what I paid myself in the operating company, whatever I could squeak out for an income, I was actually getting $15,000, $16,000 richer every month on the asset. And then when you introduce something called appreciation, right? My debt's going down. I'm depreciating my debt. It's going down, and my appreciation's going up. You see what's happening there? That's wealth. And ultimately, all I had to really do was run my operating company to be break even. It didn't even need to make money. Ultimately, it needed to service the debt. And the debt payment was what was making me wealthy, right? And long story short, about 7 years later, I sold that $6 million asset that I bought. I had paid off about $1.5 million of the debt through just paying the rent. And ultimately in year 7, I sold that $6 million asset for $19 million. Crazy thing is, the operating company never did more than 5 million in any year. I don't think it ever did more than, 5% profit margin. So if you were to add up all the profit margins from all the years, it was really minor compared to, holy heck. I bought this thing for 6 million. I paid down the debt to 3.5 or so. And then I sold it for 19. So if anybody home is good at math, it was about a $15 million gain in 7 years from running a concert promotions company that barely made a profit every year. That's asset wealth. That was making money while I slept, so that the grind, the really hard work of putting on concerts, was secondary to this very, very valuable asset that I was earning against.
Yeah.
So conceptually, what assets does your company have? Most entrepreneurs, they just don't understand the balance sheet. They don't understand the power of the balance sheet. All they really know is, hey, I want to grow. I want to be wealthier. I want to earn more income. I need more revenue. I need more sales. Okay. Level 2 is when an entrepreneur goes, well, there's 2 ways to grow. I could lessen my expenses, and that's also growing my profit, right? So it's really about revenue and expenses. Well, level 3, the mastery where I'm at, and I'm trying to teach others is, hey, understand the power of the balance sheet. That's where true wealth gets created. And we only seem to understand that in the sense of selling our companies, right? But there's a whole dance to be played there. And that's what I teach.
Wow. Amazing story there. And yeah, just the returns on that, anybody does the numbers is massive, right? Like to get that in that amount of time. So yeah, really awesome.
Well, and let's see if the audience does know. So let's take somebody that has a strategy that says, I want to have an awesome salary. I want to make $350,000 a year, right? Well, we know the government's going to come in no matter what country you're in and probably take about 30% of that, right? So let's just say that 350,000 dwindles down to about 200K. Let's just round down a little bit, right? Well, the average amount of savings for most people, at least in America, is less than 10% of your net pay. So if your net pay after taxes is $200,000, which is a great salary, 10% of that would be 20K, right? So if you're a perfect saver, if nothing new in your life, you never get a flat tire, you never get any speeding tickets, you don't have a spouse that wants you to buy them a new, upgraded ring at the 10-year mark of your wedding, you don't ever have any of these things happen. You don't want to take a fancy vacation. You don't want to, your team made the big playoffs. I don't know in Australia, what's your greatest sport? Rugby. Your team made it to the rugby finals and you want to buy those tickets. Nope, nothing, none of that, because I'm a perfect saver, right? So the best you're going to do is 20 grand a year times 10 years. And that's assuming perfect performance, right? It takes 3 years for most companies to even be profitable. And then most companies go out of business in 8.5 years on average. So really your earning is 5.5 years if you're an average person in an average company, right? So you're going to save that money. And then after 10 years, you're going to have this pool that maybe you didn't spend in other ways. That is the equivalent of a piggy bank with a hole in it. Whereas you look at an asset wealth strategy and you're servicing that debt with your revenues, right? Even if you're paying yourself less income, every month it's going in and it's a bulletproof piggy bank. There are no holes in it because you have to service that debt. Whoever the debt's with is not going to let you miss payments and skip payments, not with any consistency anyways, right? So that's what I'm really talking about here is shifting from a strategy of the only thing that matters is more sales and more revenue, right? And relying on that. No maneuver I've ever done with any of my companies caused it great pain. You know what caused my companies great pain? Outside forces, recessions, like the mortgage crisis. What did my business have to do with the mortgage crisis in America? It should have had nothing to do with it. Did it crush my business for 3 years? Absolutely. Right? So it's typically outside forces that come along. Why is it every 8.5 years companies seem to fall apart? Well, that's about how often recessions happen. Most companies are not recession proof. So I'm really encouraging entrepreneurs to develop a strategy that they can make their way through outside forces affecting their sales.
Yeah, I love that. Really great breaking down and doing it by the numbers, right? Which is what we have to do in business, right? In whatever strategy you're using, you have to run it by the numbers and it just makes sense. And, you don't get much interest on that money as well, right? From the banks and things like that. So the appreciation is massive. And I guess for a lot of people, it can be a bit of a mindset shift, right? Because, people have patterns, they have habits. So what do you mean? My parents have told me that, I just need to do this and put my money in the bank and all this sort of stuff, right? So, what do you say, or how can you help everybody watching and listening with like breaking that pattern, the cycle,
Well, it's knowledge based, right? So always looking to mentor up, because I know when I was a young entrepreneur, you're not really asking questions at all until you get to a point of profitability. And then when you get to profitability, you start to ask people, hey, how can I pay less to the government legally and not go to jail? Right. And so people that are further along from you go, oh, did you know, at least, I do business in the US only. So did you know that if you buy a car that weighs more than 6,000 pounds in America, that you can depreciate 95% of it against your profits in the same year? Right. So you start hearing tips like that. So what do? We run off to the Porsche dealership and buy a Porsche Cayenne because it weighs over 6,000 pounds. Great. I got my write-off. Right. So you kind of accumulate these little tips over time, right, that are legal, but allowable. And ultimately, the problem with that strategy is if you're just expensing away your profits, guess what? That's going to affect your ability to sell your business for what it's truly worth. And also banks aren't going to lend to you because you're making your profits disappear. You're not going to be able to add that back. Like, oh, I didn't really need the Porsche Cayenne bank that I'm trying to get a loan from, right? I just got that because I didn't want to pay taxes. The bank's not going to accept that excuse. You might get away with it on a private equity firm or someone trying to buy your company. You might get some add backs in if they make perfect sense. What depreciation does, though, is depreciation both legally and very astutely writes down your profits in a very healthy way. And then that depreciation doesn't get counted by banks or buyers, right? So it's important to know how to play the game legally, but to also build wealth. In America, every 4 years when someone runs for president, they make a big deal about the fact that Amazon doesn't pay taxes, even though they're one of the wealthiest companies in the world. Well, of course they don't pay taxes because they know what they're doing. Now, you might not feel good about that answer, but they have the best accountants and CPAs and CFOs in the world, right? And the reason they're able to make their sizable profits to go away is because they're depreciating their assets. They're not doing anything illegal, right? Immoral, maybe. They might be doing some immoral things, but in the end, they're just depreciating their assets, and they have massive assets all over the world. So I think it's really key. This level 3 is understanding as a business owner, if you don't have anything on your balance sheet, that is a mistake. That's why I love asset-based businesses, because if all your sales go to hell, you still have something to sell. Now, it might not be worth what you bought it for. Maybe it didn't appreciate, but you got value there, right?
Definitely. I love that. And, one of the things I like to say is, right, is you got to understand the game to beat the game, right? There's a whole lot of rules out there. We don't know everything ourselves. That's why we go to coaches, mentors, advisors, people that know these things and say, hey, what's the best way that we can work the system in our favor so, we can benefit and help more people, right? And build our wealth. So I love that, that you're looking at it differently, which is what everyone needs. And I guess you gave a good example of a salary before. Let's flip it a bit from the entrepreneur side, where I think most entrepreneurs have that number of, they want to become a millionaire, right? Like, it's that thing. So, how can we run an average business or whatever you want to call it, right? And still become a millionaire in, say, 10 years or less, with doing different things and helping us with how that is structured.
Yeah. So here's the challenge. I know the strategy that doesn't work well is sell, baby, sell, revenue only, because ultimately what happens is, what the natural way of things is when you do better revenue wise, you pay yourself more money, but you also have to pay everybody else more money, right? So ultimately you're increasing your lifestyle as you start to succeed. So what I equate income to is lifestyle. Hey, what kind of lifestyle do you want to have, Mr. Business Owner? Oh, I want it to be awesome. I want to be able to get bottle service at my favorite nightclub on Saturday nights. I'd like to drive a really nice car. I'd like to have a swanky apartment with a view of the opera house, right? So understand that income takes care of all of that, but it also sucks all of that up. So if you're increasing your lifestyle every time you get a raise or can afford to pay yourself more as a business owner, what are you not doing? You're not building wealth. You're increasing your lifestyle, right? So I did that for 10 years running a global company. I was making $350,000 a year. I had a $20,000 expense account. I had a fancy car from the company. On outward appearances, everything was great. But when I got married and I wanted to go buy my first house and I needed 400 grand as a down payment on the dream house at that time, I didn't have it. And what a blow that is. I'm running a global company. I blew past the 8.5-year marker. I'm doing really, really well here. My company has profit. Why can't I buy a house? Right? Because I wasn't building wealth in those 10 years. I was building lifestyle. I want to encourage you to do both. Nobody's going to stunt their top line revenue on purpose. Go ahead and drive as much sales as you can drive, but also be taking care of this other side. So how do you get to $1 million fast? I'll give an easy example. Do you have office space? Right? I'm always trying to convince people that have actually 20 employees, 30 employees, something like that, to not rent. Own your own office space. Make the investment. It'll end up being kind of a wash in terms of what you end up paying on a monthly basis. But if you're paying rent to yourself every single month, guess who's getting that wealth, the benefit of that wealth? So that's a pretty simple maneuver that anybody can kind of understand. Now, of course, in real estate, you can choose poorly and not get an appreciation win. But real estate on average appreciates 3% a year, right? Even if you're kind of a dummy at it, in most cases, in America, at least when we're talking about commercial real estate, it can go the other direction due to world events, right? But I've seen my real estate appreciate as much as 30% per year. So I'm a huge advocate of making asset purchases that appreciate, which would be mostly real estate, or utilizing asset purchases to depreciate against my profits, to keep more of my cash in the business for either growth or to pay myself.
Yeah, love
These
that.
are fundamentals. And if you're hearing this as an entrepreneur and go, what the hell is he talking about? Perfect. It's the perfect time for you to start to learn. And like I try to teach everybody, it isn't that the information isn't readily available. It's just you haven't heard about it yet. And as soon as I say something like, hey, you should take a look at opportunity zones, you plug that into Google and there's a whole big wide world there, right? So the problem is not enough of this stuff is being handed down to entrepreneurs. And I'm trying to change that. So I'm looking for entrepreneurs that are doing, say, $1 million in sales. They've proven that they're a legit entrepreneur. They've been operating. And I want to show that person how to actually be a millionaire, right? Not to just be able to say, hey, my company does $1 million, but to actually be worth $1 million. And that takes assets or one hell of a saving strategy without a piggy bank hole.
Yeah, I love that. And, with me, I always take the lens, and I think a lot of people should do this, of curiosity and openness. Like, I don't know everything. Right. I'm always looking for new things, whether that's, books or audio books. Yes, that's one way, but the deeper way is finding people like Eric here, right? That have these knowledge, they've done it before, these strategies that we haven't heard of, and go, okay, this is interesting. Open my eyes up to this. Okay, how can you help me get me to where I want to be? Right.
It's interesting. At age 40, I had my big salary. Like I said, I ran a global company, a lot of success, $350,000 salary, expense account. But again, I didn't have the 400K in life savings to actually pay for a home. So I had to go borrow that to get in my first home. And so ultimately, though, in just 7 years, I went from not having 400K in life savings to being worth 50 million. And simply because I deployed. From then on, every company I created had an asset purchase at the beginning. So I look back on when I built the global internship business, if I would have just bought one dorm, even if I begged, borrowed, or stealed the down payment, if I would have went out and done that, I would have owned a building in any of these significant cities, right? And if I kept doing that, I would likely have become a billionaire with that strategy. So I've just seen it work. And I've seen that the real power here is if you could turn your receivables business into the one that actually services the debt on the asset you own, that's the winning strategy, right? That's a tax-free way to pay down debt on an asset. If you're only buying assets after you've received income and you've paid the government their fair share, right? You're working with a much smaller pool because also you got all your expenses too. So you're really working with that savings account that everyone sucks at. I honestly, I've met a handful of people in my life that I would classify as world-class savers. A handful. And I know a lot of people. A handful. So you got to ask yourself, are you truly a world-class saver? Or do you need a new strategy? The other thing that keeps popping up for me is I coach entrepreneurs, both to pursue their bliss and their joy, and then also asset wealth. And what I keep hearing is the same thing. What do you really want? I say, what is your desire? Well, I'd really like to have a beach pad that I could go to and unwind on the weekends and get away to with my family. I'd like more vacation time with my family. They just start to basically describe a vacation lifestyle, right? But then when I look at their business, they're not doing anything to support that, right? In fact, they're barely vacationing 10 days a year, right? And they're giving somebody else their hard-earned money, like the Four Seasons or whoever else they're going out to do these things with. And so I'm looking at that and going, becoming bolder by the day and saying, I think entrepreneurs are doing it wrong. There's another way. I now buy assets and then I use my entrepreneurial skill set to create a company to service the debt. So for instance, I bought Bliss Island, this property that I named Bliss Island. I bought it for $2.9 million in Hawaii, on the cliffs of Hawaii, because the company running it before got in trouble during the recession. So during recessions, that's the best time to be buying. I went and made an offer and I got it for 2.9. Then I took a step back and said, don't really like their business that went bankrupt pretty much immediately going into the recession of COVID. I'm going to look at this and go, what kind of business do I want to run in order to service that debt? The debt was about $15,000 a month were the payments. So I said to myself, well, what are the 5 ways I like to get paid? And I was able to check mark all those boxes and go, I'm going to run a retreat business. And I'm going to bring my retreat business to be one of the first clients. And according to my math, if I charge $25,000 a week and I run 18 retreats a year, that's only 1.5 a month. I'm going to do about $400,000 in revenue. And that's easily going to service the debt and leave an extra 100 grand left over for me. Now, 400 grand is not a company that any of our listeners are going to be like, wow, that's really impressive. But look what I just did there. I bought a $2.9 million asset. I built a company only to service the debt and to meet the other 5 ways I like to get paid, right? Which are really beautiful things like goosebump moments and inspiration and beauty and stuff like that. And I'm now only running 18 retreats. This is 18 weeks of my life to basically service that debt. Well, since I bought the property for 2.9 million last year, there's been a real estate boom in Hawaii. The property is now worth 5.5 million. So how much money did I just make in my first year, right? Over on the other side, nothing. I mean, I just got the retreats going and I'm getting just enough revenue to pay for the expenses. Haven't really paid myself much of a salary yet. Sound familiar, you guys? But my asset went from 2.9 million and I've been making payments for a year. So it's probably, I owe less now. And then it appreciated to 5.5, right? My target is 9.5 million. I want this property to go up to 9.5 million. At any time that happens, I can walk away cashing out $7-8 million in that period of time. Now, let me ask the listeners, how long would it take you to save that money? How long would it take you to even earn it? In order to have $8 million, I'd have to pay myself, $800,000 a year for 10 years. Oh shit, there's taxes, excuse my language. I got to add another 30% on top of that. I got to clear $1.1 million every year to have the same result as this asset wealth strategy, right? So I've been doing this for 7 straight years. I just keep accumulating assets. And because I have assets, the banks will loan to me and I just keep buying assets. And it just keeps increasing my wealth. And the companies that I have to run to support them are small. I don't have to build these big, huge companies up anymore with huge amounts of revenue and lots of headaches and lots of employees. I have 23 companies right now. Ask me how many employees I have.
How many? Zero.
Now I have contractors. I have vendors. I have people I do business with. I have people I've given equity to be partners in different things. 0 employees. So there is a different way, right? So if you're tired of the grind and you're tired of always having to be only as good as your next sale, there's a different way to go. Get in the asset game. Understand your balance sheet better and what it can do for you and the benefits to your business to actually have some assets.
Yeah, I love that.
That's my message. Yep.
Amazing message, and just shows with the numbers of, almost doubling, within a year there, it's massive with the growth. Now, if we go one level deeper, and I know this is a bit subjective depending on where you are in the world, because we have listeners from all over the world, but I know from a US sense, right, there's LLC companies, right, where, you have, that's your business normally. Let's say your company, you would run an LLC generally. Obviously, there's other structures, but then you might have other areas there. So obviously, I know like the equivalent, PTY Ltd in Australia is like an LLC, you have separate businesses for certain things. You separate like the receivables business, as you call it, right? For risk mitigation, for tax purposes, and all these types of things, right? Now, you're talking about, making sure we focus on the balance sheet, yes, which is important. So you're sort of saying am I correct in having like two LLCs here, where one owns the asset type of thing, or is it all in the one LLC and then you're moving it before like that?
It depends. So whenever you do a real estate acquisition, you really should form its own separate LLC for no other reason but to protect the asset. So, if you're running, for instance, I run a retreat business at Bliss Island LLC, that's its job. I wouldn't want the asset to be in that business, because if you had a slip and fall or anybody got injured, right, they're now, through that company's services, they now have something very, very big to go after. So having that secondary layer of protection is just best practices. It's why the SBA very smartly says, we don't do real estate loans. We do loans to operating companies. Well, yes, they do real estate loans. They just want that extra layer of protection on the mighty asset. So, but when it comes to, say, like an equipment purchase, right? If you're going to purchase, some heavy equipment or vehicles, or I don't know, studio equipment, so you could do an even better broadcast, right? And you're going to rent that time out to other people too when you're not using it for your podcast, that would be within the company, and that would be straight depreciation, right? That you'd be looking to pull off. Now, people might say, well, Eric, an asset's really not worth it if it doesn't appreciate. Not true. Because when you buy an asset, you can depreciate that against your profits. And that means you're keeping your profits inside the company. So let's take you, for example, right? I would imagine that video cameras and green screens and all these stuff, you probably go to bed at night thinking, God, if I just had that new camera that came out, right? So that's what a lot of people do, is they wish they had these things to do their jobs better. What I would encourage a guy like you to do is, if you have that problem, guess what? All your other podcast buddy friends have the same problem. How about you be the guy to go invest and buy that equipment? The easiest loan to get in the world for banks to give, other than cash on cash, is actually equipment loans, because they know they can take the equipment back. It's why car loans are almost just simple. Everybody gets them because the lenders know they can repo the car at any time if you don't make your payments, and then they'll resell it, right? So ultimately, you go out and buy the best green screen, you buy the best HD camera equipment, and you have a studio. Hell, you even buy a studio. Well, now you can be the guy that goes out to all the other podcasters who don't have these things, that are doing the grind, and say, hey, I'll rent you studio time. What have you just done? You've created a receivables activity against your debt. Now, every time someone else rents your studio, you're making money. You're paying down your equipment, and you can depreciate that against your own profits. So I try to get people to open their minds, like, look at your top 3 expenses. Let's see if we can convert one of those to an asset. So if office rent is your biggest expense, hey, let's look at buying an office space. Oh, all this HD cameras and everything else is your biggest expense. Let's look at, so I think that's a really good strategy, is evaluating the top 3 expenses and converting at least one of those.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. That's amazing. I love it. Love the way you're thinking. And how can you, like you said, create that asset and get, whether it's your own company or get other people at the same time, right, to do it, to service that and help it grow.
Yeah, let me ram it home. My dad was pretty big time in the construction trades, but he never owned a business. He wasn't an entrepreneur, but he got brought in by a very good company to be their president, right? So he comes in and he knows, I'm going to negotiate my salary, like get the best salary possible. And this was like 20 years ago. He probably was going to make 300 grand because he was at the top of his game. But he was almost 60. And one of the things they said to him is, oh yeah, you also now have equity. Only executive team members have equity in this equipment tool company. My dad didn't think anything of it. Like, oh, great. That's a nice little bonus to me. You know what ended up making him more money in his lifetime than anything else was his equity in this tool company. So what it was my dad worked for a company that built skyscrapers in San Francisco, right? So somewhere along the way, the founder, CEO, not the founder, but the CEO of the company said, you know what? I'm tired of renting cranes. I'm tired of renting tractors and trailers and all this other heavy equipment that I need to build buildings. What if we start a separate company and we just buy that stuff? We borrow the money and then we own that stuff. And then for every construction project we bid on, we can control the pricing. And we're just paying ourselves to rent our equipment. My dad got a bigger paycheck every year from the equipment rental business than he ever got in salary. And that's what I'm trying to point out to you guys. Like, not many people know this. And I want to evangelize about this because I have a real heart for people that work their tails off and they build up nice revenue, right? But then after so many years, an outside event comes along and they have nothing but memories. And then the pain of losing what they had, right? I want to change that. And I can teach people how to do it with almost any example. So no asset's too small. Like, start anywhere. Like, what are you renting that you could turn into ownership for your business, right? And then when you get sophisticated and you want to go real estate, I'll teach you how to do that separately in a separate LLC. So the answer is it depends. It depends on the asset.
Yeah, I love that.
Does the asset need protection? If it doesn't need protection, just buy it within your company.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. Thank you for that distinction for myself and everybody there, because it's just a different way of thinking. I think that's, the biggest thing that I'm coming for, what we're listening to Eric right now is like, there's so many different ways. And I think this is the power of coaching and mentoring, right? In business and building wealth and things like that, because it allows us, for someone that's already done it, to give us these strategies. So touching on that, like, what does coaching, mentoring help you to achieve? And then, obviously passing on that as well to others.
Well, it should be pointed out, I was in personal development about 25 years ago, and I did pretty well in that space. And so a lot of my friends went on to become kind of the big dogs in the industry. But I left for 10 years to go flex my entrepreneurial muscles with this business model I was just telling you about. And that's how I went from 300 grand in my bank account to being worth 50 million in 7 years, because that's what I focused on. But while I was doing that, I turned a blind eye to personal development. So I missed like the creation of all these amazing entrepreneur events and get-togethers and gatherings and masterminds and podcasts. And I get asked all the time as I re-entered, like, hey, have you heard this podcast or read this book? And I'm like, yeah, no, I'm drawing a blank, because I was in my cocoon of, actually doing my asset wealth strategy. So as I came back into personal development, I went to a lot of amazing entrepreneur events, and I had the following couple of conclusions. Number one, somehow, some way, when I was gone for 10 years from these things, everyone learned how to be a great party thrower, right? Because these events, they're great. They ply you with alcohol. They go till 3 a.m. They got rock bands. Like, it's really fun. So becoming an entrepreneur, like, got really sexy and fun while I was away, right? Then the second thing that I quickly realized, as a person being introduced as an investor and possibly someone that could coach entrepreneurs to a higher level, was I was getting introductions, and the first version was really shiny. My business is great. I'm doing great. This is who I am in the world. And I'm just so happy and joyful. But then, because I was an investor, 3 weeks later, I'd get this secondary version. I'm almost out of money. I have no personal net worth. My company's hemorrhaging, right? And this wasn't across the board, but it started to emerge a picture for me. Like, we're so used to projecting out as business owners how fantastic we're doing, because we want to keep that image up, because we want to attract the good into our lives. We're forgetting to take care of ourselves, both personally, emotionally, physically, health-wise, all of these other areas. There's already a higher degree of mental health issues with entrepreneurs. It's something like a 5% increase over the average, average citizen. And so the stresses and the pressures are there. So I'm here on the other side going, man, wouldn't you sleep better at night if you knew you were taking care of yourself, if you were feeding your soul, you were feeding your health, and that you were also feeding your wealth, right? So that's why I'm both a bliss coach, which what that just really means is trying to show people a path to joy, what feeds your soul. And then I'm also an asset wealth coach, because I know that financial pressures are the things that really undo and put the most pressure on entrepreneurs. So I think you need to take care of yourself. And a wealth building strategy is really, really key, because guess what? The sales won't always be there. Something will happen. Something will change. Competition will come along. A massive global event will happen. I can guarantee you in 30 years of business, guaranteed, inside of a decade, something messed up will happen that you didn't create. It's not your fault, but it happens. And then where you're going to be, if you didn't actually build wealth, is starting all over. And that's the thing I see that's the most painful for entrepreneurs, right? It's like, I worked so hard, I don't deserve this. Yeah, you don't deserve this. You didn't create some, global plague. That wasn't your fault. You built an awesome business, and you lost that awesome business, and you couldn't weather the storm because you didn't have any real wealth anymore within the business or yourself. So that's my message, is take care of yourself in all these areas. It's really, really critical, because I've seen the other side. And as a coach, I get to hear the real deal. I get to hear the authentic version of what people are going through as entrepreneurs. And so I'm really out there to make that change, to get people super healthy in every way.
Yeah, I love that. So powerful words. And I think that's a great way to wrap this thing up as well on a massive note. So, we connected through our networks, where I learned about your awesome journey from your first big asset purchase, the Fox Theater in California, to founding or co-founding exactly, 27 entities in your 25-year career as an entrepreneur. You've worked in the entertainment, events, personal development, real estate, media, winemaking, investing industries, and now you coach business owners on how to build asset wealth. Amazing today. So, you're an awesome guy, great energy, and I'm sure you're going to help continue to help many entrepreneurs to grow their asset wealth globally. So I'm very grateful that we connected. I look forward to working with you in the future. So how can people find you, get in contact with you, Eric?
Yeah. So you see all those pictures behind me? Those are all entrepreneurs that I've helped, and you're only seeing like 8 of those pictures. So I've actually done 15 retreats over the last 3 years with my partner, Patrick Combs. And we do that through a company called Bliss Champions. So if you go to blisschampions.com, what we're really looking for, our avatar, is somebody that's already had their business success, right? But is starting to feel some of these stressors. Joy is starting to slip away a little bit. They're not feeding their soul anymore. They're running a company, but they almost feel like a prisoner in their own company. So if that sounds like you, blisschampions.com. If you're interested in running a retreat at my Bliss Island, or being a part of a retreat at Bliss Island, go to blissisland.com. That's pretty straightforward. I rent my property. I have 8 luxury hotel rooms right next to a 4-bedroom mansion, all on 3.5-acre tropical acres right on the cliff's edge, on the big island of Hawaii. And so I do rent my property out. I bring a world-class chef to the equation, my staffing, my 25 years of event experience. There used to be a funny show back in the day in America called Fantasy Island. I fancy myself Mr. Rourke and Tattoo, both. So that's kind of my job when I bring retreats in. So you can reach out to me through blissisland.com. And then finally, if you're interested in asset wealth, you can go to assetwealth.com. Also, my name, ericlochtefeld.com, points to the same place. And I handpick people to actually coach. And one of the joyful things for me is that I come to you. No matter where you live in the world, assuming I can travel with COVID and all that, restrictions, I will come to you and I'll coach you personally over the course of a day. And then over the course of many months, I'll stick with you as you go after an asset purchase. And then I'll also assist you on the asset purchase itself if you want me to go that far with you. And so that's a very unique new coaching practice that I'm doing. It's going great. And I love the fact that I can both inspire people to do that and give them a lot of evidence of why it will work, but then also give them tactically how to pull it off. So those are really the 3 things that I'm out advocating for and would like to share. I got lots of other businesses, but they don't really have anything to do with this call.
Love it, Eric. That's amazing. And I'm sure, there's so much amount of value there, and everyone definitely check him out depending on where you're at. Because Eric's the man. You can feel it. He knows his stuff. So definitely reach out to him if you want to enjoy yourself blissfully or asset wealthily as well. So thank you everyone for watching. Listen to this show where we talk about everything on business growth. Please like, subscribe, and leave us a 5-star review. You can find me on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube as Athin Cassiotis, or visit my website, athincassiotis.com. I completely agree with you, or do I? The only way you will know is if you tune in next time. So until next time, remember that our business grows when we learn skills and take action using them in spite of fear. Have a great day.